The suitcase hit the pavement with a dull thud, its contents spilling across the rain-soaked street. I stared at my belongings, a few worn clothes, textbooks, and the small jade pendant my grandmother had given me, scattered like my shattered dreams. "Elena, you have to understand," my mother Victoria's voice cut through the downpour, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the doorframe of our family mansion. "David needs his space to focus on his studies. The house simply isn't big enough for both of you anymore." Not big enough. Our 30-room estate wasn't big enough. I looked up at her through the rain, my heart breaking for what I thought was the last time. "Mum, please, I have nowhere else to go. The semester starts in 2 days, and that's precisely why this is perfect timing." Her smile was as cold as the October wind. "You're resourceful, dear. You'll figure something out. David's pre-med program is incredibly demanding, and he can't have distractions." David appeared behind her, his arm casually draped around his girlfriend Melissa's shoulders. At 19, my younger brother had always been the golden child, the biological son, the heir, the future of the Chen family legacy, or so they all believed. "Sorry, sis," David said with a shrug that wasn't sorry at all. "Maybe this will teach you some independence. Mum's been babying you too long anyway." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through my soul. I knelt in the rain, gathering my scattered belongings, each drop of water mixing with tears I refused to acknowledge. This was it. 22 years of being the grateful adopted daughter, and this was my reward. I spent that night in a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at my phone. No missed calls, no texts asking if I was safe, nothing. By morning, hypothermia was setting in, and I dragged myself to the nearest hospital emergency room. "Severe exposure and malnutrition," the doctor told the social worker 3 days later. "She's been living on the streets. Are you sure there's no family who can take her in?" The social worker, a tired woman named Miss Rodriguez, shook her head. "The mother claims she's legally an adult and no longer their responsibility. The family has requested no contact." That night, alone in a charity shelter bed, I closed my eyes and whispered the same prayer I'd said every night since I was 7. "Grandmother, if you're watching over me, please help me understand why this is happening." The jade pendant around my neck grew warm. I opened my eyes to find myself staring at a familiar cream-coloured ceiling, with delicate crown moulding. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat up, recognising my old bedroom, the one I'd been banished from just days ago. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and outside I could hear David laughing by the pool. But that was impossible. David was supposed to be at his pre-med orientation. That was 3 days from now, which meant... I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking as I checked the date. October 15th. The day before they threw me out. "This can't be real," I whispered, but even as I spoke, I heard Victoria's voice echoing up the stairs. "Elena, come down for breakfast, darling. We need to discuss David's room situation." My blood ran cold. It was starting again. The conversation that would lead to my exile, my homelessness, my near-death experience. But somehow, impossibly, I was back. I stood on trembling legs, catching sight of myself in the antique mirror that had belonged to my grandmother. I looked exactly the same, long black hair, dark eyes that held too much hope, wearing the white cotton dress I'd put on that morning, convinced it would be just another ordinary day with my family. But it wasn't ordinary. It was the beginning of the end. Except this time, I remembered every devastating detail of what was coming. "Elena!" Victoria's voice grew sharper. "Don't make me come up there." I took a deep breath, my fingers unconsciously touching the jade pendant. "I'm coming, Mum." But as I walked toward the door, I paused. In my memories of that original morning, I had rushed downstairs eager to please, desperate to be helpful. I'd agreed immediately to give up my room, to move to the tiny servants' quarters in the attic. I'd been so grateful they were keeping me at all. This time I knew better. This time I walked slowly, deliberately, my mind racing with possibilities. If I truly had been given a second chance, I wouldn't waste it on the same naive mistakes. I would be strategic. I would be smart. And most importantly, I would make them pay for what they'd done to me. The dining room was exactly as I remembered. Crystal chandelier casting rainbow patterns across the mahogany table. Victoria in her silk morning robe. David lounging in his chair like a prince surveying his kingdom. The smell of Mrs. Patterson's famous pancakes filled the air, a comfort that had once felt like home. "There you are, sweetheart," Victoria said, her tone honeyed with false affection. "Sit down. David has some wonderful news to share." I took my usual seat, the one facing the garden, and folded my hands in my lap exactly as I had the first time. But inside, I was calculating, remembering, planning. "I got into the accelerated pre-med program at Stanford," David announced, puffing out his chest. "Full ride plus a research stipend. Dr. Morrison says I'm one of the most promising candidates he's seen in years." "That's wonderful," I said, forcing my voice to match the enthusiasm I'd shown before. But this time, I knew the truth. David hadn't earned that spot. Victoria had bought it with a substantial donation to the medical school's new wing. I'd overheard the phone conversation 3 days later, when I was hiding in the campus library, trying to stay warm. "The thing is," Victoria continued, reaching over to pat David's hand, "he'll need absolute quiet to prepare. You know how demanding medical school preparation can be." Here it came, the setup, the gentle manipulation that would lead to my exile. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "David's education is the most important thing." Victoria beamed at my compliance, just as she had before. "I knew you'd understand. We've been thinking, wouldn't it be better if you had your own space? Somewhere you could really spread your wings, become independent?" In my first life, I'd agreed immediately, so desperate to please that I'd practically volunteered to be thrown out. This time, I tilted my head thoughtfully, as if considering the idea. "My own space would be nice," I said carefully, "but I'd need to make sure I could still afford my tuition at the community college, and my part-time job at the bookstore barely covers my expenses as it is." David shifted uncomfortably. He'd never liked being reminded that I worked while he lived off the family money. "Well," Victoria said, her smile becoming slightly strained, "perhaps this is the perfect opportunity for you to learn some real-world skills. Independence builds character, don't you think?" "Absolutely," I agreed. "In fact, I think I should start by reviewing the family finances. Since I'll be managing my own budget, I should understand where I currently stand. Could I see the trust documents Grandmother set up for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's coffee cup clinked against the saucer as her hand trembled slightly. "Trust documents?" she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Grandmother Chen mentioned setting up educational trusts for both David and me before she passed. I never saw the paperwork, but I assume the documents are in the family safe." David and Victoria exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that had passed between conspirators for the past 7 years, ever since my grandmother's death. In my first life, I'd been too trusting to notice these subtle communications. This time, I catalogued every micro-expression. "Oh, sweetheart," Victoria said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "There must have been some misunderstanding. Your grandmother, well, she was quite elderly toward the end. Sometimes she made promises she couldn't keep." "I see." I nodded as if accepting this explanation, while inside my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Elena, my precious girl, I've made sure you'll be taken care of. The jade pendant holds more than just my love. It holds your future." At the time, I'd thought she was being poetic. Now I wondered if she'd been trying to tell me something crucial. "So, there's no trust fund?" I asked innocently. "I'm afraid not," Victoria confirmed, her relief evident. "But that's why this move toward independence is so important. You'll learn to rely on yourself instead of depending on family money." Like David was doing, I thought but didn't say. "Of course, I understand completely," I replied, "though I do have one small concern." "What's that, dear?" "Well, if I'm moving out to become independent, I'll need to officially transfer my legal residency, change my address on all my documents, update my emergency contacts, that sort of thing." I paused, watching Victoria's face carefully. "I should probably also contact grandmother's estate attorney. Mr. Hendricks, wasn't it? I'll need copies of my birth certificate and adoption papers for the residency change, and I believe he has those in his files." Victoria's face went white. David choked on his orange juice. That won't be necessary," Victoria stammered. "I can provide any documents you need." "Oh, but I wouldn't want to trouble you," I said sweetly. "Besides, Mr. Hendricks knew grandmother so well. I'm sure he'd love to hear how the family is doing. It's been, 7 years since we last spoke with him. I should visit him anyway, just to pay my respects to grandmother's memory." The jade pendant grew warm against my chest, and suddenly I understood. My grandmother had been trying to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Whatever secrets Victoria and David were hiding, Mr. Hendricks held the key. "Elena," Victoria said, her voice sharp now, the maternal facade finally cracking. "I don't think bothering Mr. Hendricks is appropriate. He's a very busy man and—" "Actually," I interrupted, standing from the table, "I think I'll give his office a call right now. Thank you for breakfast, Mum, and congratulations again, David. I'm sure your future will be everything you deserve." As I walked toward the door, I heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath and David's urgent whisper, "Mum, what if she actually contacts him?" I smiled to myself as I climbed the stairs to my room. In my first life, I'd been thrown out that very afternoon, too devastated and confused to think clearly. I'd never had the chance to investigate, never questioned the lies they'd fed me. This time would be different. This time I would uncover every secret they'd buried. And when I did, Victoria and David would learn that the quiet, grateful daughter they'd discarded was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The jade pendant pulsed with warmth, and I could swear I heard my grandmother's voice whispering, "Show them, my dear Elena, show them who you really are." I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized 7 years ago. "Hendricks, Morrison and Associates?" came the receptionist's voice. "Hello," I said, my voice steady with newfound purpose. "This is Elena Chen. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Hendricks regarding my grandmother's estate. It's quite urgent." As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The girl looking back at me no longer held naive hope in her eyes. Instead, I saw determination, calculation, and something else. The promise of justice. Victoria and David had made their choice 7 years ago when they decided to steal my inheritance and my identity. Now it was time for them to face the consequences. The real Elena Chen was about to be reborn. The law offices of Hendricks, Morrison and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of downtown's most prestigious building. As the elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor, I caught glimpses of the city sprawling below, a city that, according to what I was about to discover, partially belonged to me. Mr. Hendricks looked exactly as I remembered from my grandmother's funeral 7 years ago, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the bearing of a man who'd spent decades protecting other people's secrets. What I hadn't remembered was the way his face lit up when his secretary announced my arrival. "Elena Chen," he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk with genuine warmth. "My dear girl, I've been wondering when you would finally come to see me." "Wondering?" I took the offered chair, noting the thick manila folder already waiting on his desk. A folder with my name written across the tab in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. "Your grandmother made me promise something before she died," he said, settling back into his chair. "She made me swear that if you ever came to me asking questions about your inheritance, I would tell you everything. Everything, Elena. No matter how long it had been." My heart pounded. "My inheritance?" "The inheritance your adoptive family has been stealing from you for 7 years. His voice carried the weight of long-suppressed anger. "Elena, you're not just wealthy, you're one of the richest young women in the country. Your grandmother didn't just set up a trust fund for your education. She left you everything." The world tilted. "Everything?" Mr. Hendricks opened the folder and spread documents across the desk. The Chen Industries empire, the real estate portfolio spanning 12 states, the investment accounts in Switzerland, Hong Kong, and New York, the art collection, the jewelry, the offshore holdings, all of it was supposed to transfer to you on your 21st birthday. I stared at the papers, my grandmother's signature flowing across page after page of legal documents. "But I turned 21 over a year ago." "I know." His jaw tightened. "I sent notification to your guardian, Victoria Chen, informing her of the transfer timeline. I also sent copies directly to you at the family address. Did you ever receive them?" "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Victoria always sorted the mail. She said anything important would be handled through the family lawyer." "I am the family lawyer, Elena. I have been for 30 years. He pulled out another document. "This is your grandmother's will, the original copy in her own handwriting. Would you like to know what it says about your adoptive family?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Victoria Chen and her son David are to receive a monthly stipend of $50,000 each, provided they ensure Elena's safety, education, and happiness until her 21st birthday. Should they fail in this duty, or should they attempt to harm Elena in any way, their stipend will cease immediately, and they will be required to vacate the family home within 30 days. The room spun around me. "The mansion belongs to me?" "The mansion, the cars, the bank accounts they've been living off of, it's all yours. Victoria and David have been your employees, Elena, not your benefactors. Paid employees who were supposed to be taking care of you." I thought of Victoria's cold dismissal, David's casual cruelty, the way they'd thrown me out like garbage. They were being paid to take care of me, and instead they've been lying to you about your inheritance while living off your money. Mr. Hendricks pulled out his phone. "I've been documenting everything, Elena. Every withdrawal from your accounts, every expenditure they've made using your funds. David's Stanford tuition, paid with your money. Victoria's shopping sprees, her spa treatments, her jewelry, all charged to accounts that legally belong to you." "How much?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Your current net worth, including assets and investments, is approximately $427 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. 400 million. While I'd been working part-time at a bookstore for minimum wage, scraping together money for community college, they'd been spending my inheritance. "There's more," Mr. Hendricks continued gently. "Your grandmother also established educational and charitable foundations in your name. The Elena Chen Foundation has been funding scholarships and medical research for 7 years. You're technically the CEO of a multi-million-dollar non-profit organization. But I didn't know, because Victoria has been signing documents as your legal guardian, claiming to act in your best interests. Except guardianship expires at 18, Elena. For the past 4 years, every document she signed in your name has been fraudulent." The jade pendant burned against my chest, and suddenly I understood my grandmother's final gift. She hadn't just left me money. She'd left me power. The power to destroy the people who'd betrayed her love and trust. "What can I do?" I asked. Mr. Hendricks smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Legally, you can revoke their access to all accounts immediately. You can evict them from your property. You can press charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The evidence is overwhelming. And practically, you can do whatever you want, Elena. You have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, more influence than they could ever dream of, and the legal right to take back everything they've stolen." I stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Somewhere down there, Victoria and David were probably celebrating my departure, dividing up my bedroom and planning how to spend more of my money. "I want to see everything," I said. "Every account, every property, every investment. I want to understand exactly what's mine." "Of course." Mr. Hendricks pulled out another folder. "This contains the keys and access codes to everything. Bank accounts, properties, vehicles, safe deposit boxes. Your grandmother was very thorough." As he handed me the folder, a photograph slipped out, my grandmother and me at my high school graduation, both of us smiling at the camera. On the back, in her handwriting, "Elena, my precious girl, you are stronger than you know, richer than they imagine, and loved beyond measure. When the time comes, show them who you really are." Tears blurred my vision. She'd known. Somehow, my grandmother had known this day would come. "There's one more thing," Mr. Hendricks said softly. "Your grandmother left you a letter. She asked me to give it to you only after you learned the truth about your inheritance." He handed me a cream-coloured envelope sealed with wax and bearing my grandmother's personal stamp. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then Victoria and David have finally shown their true nature. I am sorry, my sweet girl, that you had to experience their betrayal to understand the truth. I knew, even as I adopted you at age 7, that you were special, not just because of your kind heart or bright mind, but because you carried within you a strength that reminded me of myself at your age. I also knew that my death would bring out the worst in Victoria and David, their greed, their jealousy, their willingness to hurt an innocent child for money. So I planned accordingly. The jade pendant you wear contains a microchip with recordings of every conversation I had with Victoria about your future, every promise she made to care for you, every agreement she signed to secure her monthly payments. She doesn't know this, of course. She believes she's been very clever, stealing from a dead woman's granddaughter. She has no idea that the dead woman was far cleverer. Elena, you now have the power to reclaim not just your inheritance, but your dignity. You can show the world who you really are, not the grateful adopted daughter they wanted you to believe you were, but the rightful heir to everything I built. Use this power wisely, use it justly, but most importantly, use it to become the woman you were always meant to be. With all my love and faith in you, grandmother." I looked up at Mr. Hendricks, who was watching me with knowing eyes. "She recorded them? For years? Every phone call, every meeting in her study? Your grandmother was a businesswoman, Elena. She believed in documentation." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small device. "The pendant's chip can be accessed with this reader. Would you like to hear what they said about you after the funeral?" I took the reader with hands that no longer trembled. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate need to please, all of it was gone. In its place was something new, cold, calculating fury. "Yes," I said, "I want to hear everything." As the first recording began to play, Victoria's voice discussing how much money they could save by sending me to public school instead of the private academy my grandmother had specified, I felt the last piece of my old self crumble away. The grateful, naive Elena Chen was dead. In her place stood a $400 million heiress who had 7 years of betrayal to repay. "Mr. Hendricks," I said, my voice steady with newfound purpose. "I want to freeze all their accounts immediately, and I want to schedule a family meeting for tonight. It's time Victoria and David learned exactly who they've been stealing from." He nodded approvingly. "Consider it done. What would you like me to tell them the meeting is about?" I smiled, and for the first time in my life, it felt like my grandmother's smile. Sharp, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless. "Tell them it's about my future. They're going to find it very educational." As I left the law offices that afternoon, the setting sun caught the windows of every building I now owned, turning them into mirrors that reflected my transformation. The scared girl who had begged on her knees in the rain was gone forever. Tonight, Victoria and David would meet the real Elena Chen, and they were going to wish they had never been born. I returned to the mansion at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that contained 7 years' worth of financial records, legal documents, and recordings that would destroy 2 lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was entering my own home as if I were a guest, when, in reality, Victoria and David were the ones who had been living here illegally for years. Mrs. Patterson, our longtime housekeeper, greeted me at the door with confusion in her eyes. "Miss Eleanor, I thought you were... Mrs. Chen said you had moved out." "Plans change, Mrs. Patterson," I said gently. She'd always been kind to me, unlike the family she served. "Is everyone gathered in the study as Mr. Hendricks requested?" "Yes, miss. Though I have to say, Mrs. Chen seemed quite upset about this mysterious meeting. She's been pacing for an hour." "Perfect. Let her worry." The study was exactly as my grandmother had left it. Dark wood panelling, leather-bound books, and the massive oil painting of great-grandfather Chen, who had built the family fortune from nothing. Victoria sat rigidly in one of the wing-back chairs, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the armrest. David lounged across from her, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Mr. Hendricks stood by the fireplace, his expression professionally neutral. When I entered, he nodded slightly, the signal that everything was in place. "Elena," Victoria's voice was sharp with barely controlled anxiety. "What's this about? Mr. Hendricks said it was urgent family business, but he wouldn't explain further." "Please, sit down," I said, taking my place behind grandmother's massive desk, the power position in the room. "We have a lot to discuss." "Since when do you call family meetings?" David scoffed, but his bravado couldn't hide the nervousness in his voice. "And why are you sitting there? That's grandfather's chair." "Actually," I said, opening the briefcase with deliberate slowness, "it's my chair. This is my house. Those are my books on the shelves, my paintings on the walls, and that Waterford crystal you're drinking from belongs to me as well." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone ashen, while David's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for frosted air. "Don't be ridiculous," Victoria finally managed. "Eleanor, I know you're upset about moving out, but making up fantasies won't change." "Fantasies?" I pulled out the first document and slid it across the desk toward her. "This is grandmother's original will. Perhaps you'd like to read the part about your $50,000 monthly stipend, contingent on ensuring my safety, education, and happiness." Victoria's hand shook as she reached for the document. I watched her eyes scan the pages, watched the colour drain completely from her face as she realised what she was seeing. "This is impossible," she whispered. "The will was read 7 years ago. David and I inherited the house, and you inherited nothing." My voice cut through her denial like a blade. "You were employees, Victoria. Paid caretakers who were supposed to protect me until my 21st birthday. The birthday that passed over a year ago, meaning your employment contract has been void for quite some time." David snatched the will from his mother's trembling hands. As he read, his face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, terror. "But the lawyer said," he began. "What lawyer?" I asked sweetly. "Mr. Hendricks has been the family attorney for 30 years. When exactly did you speak with another lawyer about grandmother's will?" The trap snapped shut beautifully. David's mouth opened and closed silently as he realized his mistake. Victoria shot him a murderous look, but it was too late. I continued, pulling out another folder. "That would be because you never spoke to any other lawyer? You simply decided to lie to me about my inheritance and hope I'd never discover the truth. Unfortunately for you, I've discovered quite a lot." I spread the financial records across the desk like a dealer laying out cards. 7 years of bank statements, 7 years of expenditures charged to accounts that legally belonged to me. David's Stanford tuition, $400,000 of my money. Victoria's credit card bills, averaging $30,000 per month, all from my accounts. The family vacations to Europe that I was mysteriously never invited on, another $250,000 of my funds. "You can't prove," Victoria started. "I can prove everything." I pulled out the small recording device Mr. Hendricks had given me. You see, grandmother was far more intelligent than either of you realized. She knew exactly what kind of people you were, so she took precautions. I pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room, crystal clear, despite the recording being 7 years old. "The little brat will never know the difference. As long as we keep her believing she's just the adopted charity case, we can spend whatever we want. Who's going to tell her? She has no one else." David's younger voice chimed in. "What if she asks questions when she turns 18? "She won't. I've made sure she thinks she's worthless, that she should be grateful for any scrap of attention we give her. Besides, even if she did ask, who would believe her over us?" I stopped the recording and looked up at their horrified faces. "Should I play more?" "I have hours of recordings, Victoria. 7 years of you and David discussing how stupid I was, how easy it was to steal from me, how grateful you were that grandmother died before she could see what you were really like. Elena, you have to understand." Victoria's voice broke as tears began streaming down her face. "We were grieving. We weren't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to forge documents with my signature." I pulled out another stack of papers. "These are withdrawal authorizations supposedly signed by me, except I was 14 when this one was dated. Unless you're claiming I was signing legal documents as a minor, you'll need to explain how my signature appears on paperwork authorizing a $50,000 transfer to David's college fund." David lurched to his feet, his face red with rage. "You ungrateful bitch! We gave you a home, we fed you, "You gave me nothing." The words exploded from me with 7 years of suppressed fury. "You gave me nothing because it was never yours to give. Every meal I ate, every piece of clothing on my back, every book I read, all of it was paid for with my own money, while you convinced me I should be thankful for your charity." Mr. Hendricks stepped forward, his voice cutting through the emotional chaos. "Elena, perhaps we should discuss the legal ramifications." "Yes, let's." I stood, walking around the desk to face Victoria and David directly. The legal ramifications are quite severe. Identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, since you were stealing from grandmother's trust while she was still alive. The prosecutor I spoke with this afternoon estimated you're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, sobbing openly now. David stood frozen, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his arrogant facade. "However," I continued, my voice taking on the same tone grandmother had used during business negotiations, "I'm prepared to offer you an alternative." Hope flickered in Victoria's eyes. What kind of alternative?" "Confession? full confession of everything you've done, recorded and notarized. Complete repayment of every stolen dollar with interest. And public acknowledgement of your crimes. I want announcements in every newspaper, every social media platform you use, every organization you belong to. I want everyone who knows you to understand exactly what you are. And if we do all that, David asked, his voice barely above a whisper, then instead of prison, you get exile. You leave this house tonight with nothing but the clothes on your backs. You never contact me again, you never speak my name again, and you never set foot in this city again. Consider it a generous offer, given that legally I could have you both arrested tonight. Victoria looked up at me with desperate eyes. Elena, please, I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Family? The word came out as a laugh, but there was no humour in it. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't throw children out on the street to die of exposure. You want to know what family looks like. I walked to grandmother's portrait and placed my hand on the frame. Family is a grandmother who loved me enough to protect me even after death. Family is making sure someone you love is cared for, not making sure they never discover how much you've stolen from them. I turned back to face them, and in that moment, I felt my grandmother's strength flowing through me. You have 1 hour to decide, confession and exile, or I call the police and you spend the next 2 decades in federal prison. Either way, your time in this house, my house, is over. David looked at his mother, and I saw the moment they both realized they had no choice. The entitled arrogance that had carried them through 7 years of theft and abuse crumbled into desperate self-preservation. We'll confess, Victoria whispered. We'll do whatever you want. Excellent. I returned to my seat behind the desk, every inch the CEO I'd unknowingly been for years. Mr. Hendricks will prepare the documents. You have until midnight to pack 1 suitcase each and leave. The security codes will be changed at 12:01 a.m, and if you're still on the property, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. As they stumbled from the room, broken and defeated, I felt the jade pendant grow warm against my chest one final time. In its warmth, I felt my grandmother's approval, her love, and her fierce pride in the woman I'd become. The scared, grateful little girl was gone forever. In her place sat Elena Chen, heiress, CEO, and the architect of perfect justice. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Chen Industries' flagship building, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as protesters gathered outside Stanford Medical School. The news coverage was brutal. Students demanding David's expulsion, faculty distancing themselves from the scandal, donors threatening to pull funding. The headline scrolling across the bottom of every news channel read, "Medical students' admission bought with stolen inheritance." "The university has officially revoked his acceptance," reported my new assistant Jessica, as she handed me the morning briefings. "They're also returning the donation money to the Elena Chen Foundation and publicly apologising for their oversight in the admission process." I smiled, sipping my coffee from a mug emblazoned with my company logo. "And the other matter? Victoria's country club membership has been terminated. The charity board voted unanimously to remove her from the Children's Hospital fundraising committee after the financial audit revealed the missing donations. She's also been banned from the art auction house where she was buying pieces with your stolen money." The systematic destruction of their social standing had been almost as satisfying as reclaiming my fortune. Almost. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Elena, please." David lost his mind completely. "He's in psychiatric hold after trying to... Please, we need help. We're living in a shelter. I'll do anything. Victoria." I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay ash. "Miss Chen?" Jessica's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." "Send them in." The conference room doors opened and Alexander Sterling walked in. 6 feet of sharp intelligence wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. As the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, he was one of the few people in the city whose wealth actually rivaled mine. More importantly, he was the man Victoria had tried to set up with David at a charity gala 2 years ago, back when she'd believed her son was heir to the Chen fortune. "Elena," Alexander said, extending his hand with a smile that made my pulse quicken. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I have to admit, I'm impressed by what you've accomplished in such a short time." "Business or pleasure, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit. "Both, if I'm being honest." His dark eyes held mine with an intensity that would have terrified the old Elena. The new me found it intriguing. "I have a proposition that I think will interest you." He spread architectural plans across the conference table. "A joint venture. Sterling Enterprises and Chen Industries partnering to build the largest medical research facility on the West Coast. Funding for treatments that insurance companies won't cover. Research into rare diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignore because they're not profitable enough." I studied the blueprints, my business mind automatically calculating costs and potential returns. But it was the personal touch that caught my attention. A small plaque design in the corner reading, "The Margaret Chen Memorial Research Center." "You knew my grandmother?" I asked. "She saved my sister's life when we were children. Leukemia treatment that my family couldn't afford. Your grandmother paid for everything, anonymously. I only found out years later when I had enough resources to investigate." His voice softened. "She was remarkable, Elena, and from what I've seen of you these past months, the apple didn't fall far from the tree." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that the old Elena would have dismissed as impossible. Rich men like Alexander Sterling didn't have real emotions, she would have thought. But the new Elena recognized the pain of loss, the gratitude of someone who understood the weight of unexpected kindness. "What's the real reason you're here?" I asked directly. He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Because 3 months ago, you were the most fascinating woman I'd never met. Today, you're the most fascinating woman I have met, and I wanted to see if the rumours were true." "What rumours?" "That Elena Chen is not just brilliant at revenge, she's brilliant at everything." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood freeze. Stanford Medical School. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away to answer. "Miss Chen, this is Dr. Morrison from Stanford. I'm calling about David Chen." My grip tightened on the phone. "What about him?" There's been an incident. He attacked another student during a psychiatric evaluation, claiming that student was stealing his life like you did. He's been arrested for assault and, Miss Chen, he's been making threats against you. Specific, detailed threats. The police want to discuss protection options." The world tilted slightly. Even in his complete mental breakdown, David was still trying to destroy me. "I understand. Thank you for calling." I hung up and found Alexander watching me with concern. "Everything all right?" I looked at this man who had known my grandmother's kindness, who saw potential partnership instead of competition, who looked at me like I was worth knowing rather than worth using. The old Eleanor would have lied, would have hidden the threat, would have handled everything alone out of shame and fear. The new Eleanor made a different choice. "My adopted brother has apparently had a psychotic break and is making threats against my life," I said matter-of-factly. "The police want to discuss protective measures." Alexander's expression darkened immediately. "What do you need?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe you're overreacting." Just, "What do you need?" It was such a simple response, but it meant everything. "Honestly, I need to remember that no matter how much money I have, how much power I've reclaimed, there will always be people who want to take it away from me. People who think I don't deserve what I've earned. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Reclaiming your inheritance, destroying their lives. I thought about the question seriously, looking out at the city I now partially owned, thinking about the foundations I funded, the scholarships I'd expanded, the research hospital we might build together. No, I said finally, but I regret that it took losing everything to find out who I really was. I regret the years I spent believing I was worthless when I was worth $400 million. I regret not trusting myself sooner. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. You know what I see when I look at you, Elena? What? Someone who turned the worst betrayal of her life into the greatest victory. Someone who discovered that the power was inside her all along. The money just gave her the tools to use it. He turned back to me, and there was something in his eyes that made my heart race. I'd like to be part of whatever comes next. Business partner, friend, whatever you'll allow. But I want you to know, you're not facing anything alone anymore unless you choose to. Before I could respond, Jessica knocked and entered with an urgent expression. Miss Chen, you need to see this. She handed me a tablet displaying a live newsfeed. The headline made me smile. Chen Industries heiress announces billion-dollar medical research initiative. But it wasn't my announcement. Someone had leaked Alexander's proposal to the press before we'd even agreed to it. Did you? I started to ask Alexander. No, he said, but he was grinning. Though, I have to admit, I like their confidence in assuming you'd say yes. I looked at the news coverage, at the stock prices already climbing, at the interview requests flooding in, at the world watching to see what Elena Chen would do next. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the attention. Mr. Sterling, I said, extending my hand to shake his, you have yourself a deal. Let's build something worthy of my grandmother's memory. As we shook hands, I caught my reflection in the conference room window, confident, powerful, completely transformed from the broken girl who had knelt in the rain just months ago. My phone buzzed with another text from Victoria. The news says you're building a research centre. Your grandmother would be so proud. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. This time, I didn't delete it immediately. Instead, I typed back, she is proud. I can feel it. Then I deleted the conversation thread entirely and blocked the number. Some forgiveness was possible, but some chapters were meant to stay closed forever. Alexander was still holding my hand when I looked up at him. So, partner, he said with a smile that promised interesting complications ahead, ready to change the world? I smiled back, feeling the jade pendant warm against my chest one last time. My grandmother's final blessing on the woman I'd become. I've been ready my whole life, I said. I just didn't know it yet. Outside, the city stretched endlessly before us, full of possibilities that the old Elena would never have dared to imagine. But the old Elena was gone, and the new one was just getting started.